On her first public appearance, she will be the backbone for all of us to comprehend this presentation. She is a curious, keen observer, and like us, she is adequately neurotic, slightly fanatical, and highly inquisitive. What goes through an observer's mind when he perceives a piece of art in front of him? What goes through an artist's mind when he encounters a blank page, a blank screen, or a blank piece of land for that matter? Well, there is an immediate explosion of strings of thought through the mind of the artist or the observer, often termed as imagination, and a process of understanding begins. This is frequently termed as comprehension. To understand it better, let's see how the Oxford defines these words. Comprehension is to understand the nature of, meaning of, grasp with the mind or to perceive. Imagination is the faculty of imagining or of performing mental images or concepts of what is not actually present to the senses. There have been several attempts to research on what kind of equilibrium exists between comprehension and imagination and whether one supports or seizes the other. Imagination is rooted in our own personal experiences. It is derived from what has happened to each one of us in the past individually and what we remember of it, or in fact, how we all prefer to retain it. For example, he too will comprehend a long moving rectangle as a bus rather than a motorcycle, only if she has seen a bus and a motorcycle in the past. The point here is that our comprehension is not detachable from what we have experienced in the past, and of course, it differs from person to person. But the important issue here is, why do we comprehend at all at the first place? Or, what do we do after comprehending something?
Here comes imagination. We assume all of you are alert enough to point it out that imagination already existed in the scene. It is our very own imagination which helps comprehension, and as soon as you comprehend, imagination gets killed. It's like comprehension backstabbing imagination. For example, Kitu receives a packed gift on her birthday. Now she gets curious and tries to imagine what she has got for her birthday. She makes some guesses based on her past experiences. And finally, when she unpacks the gift, she comes to know what is there inside. She comprehends, and that's it. Imagination ends there. Death. With comprehension comes the end of imagination. Kitu, you know that we all have inherent qualities, of which some are exhibited to be very natural and personal, regardless of the system and surroundings. One such quality is the urge for expression in subjective degrees across all spheres of life. Automatic expression and dream are two extremes of this expression. Automatic expression is something that is driven by necessity, usually like a reaction. Dream is a more subtle expression. Such a form of expression about life and soul, an act of man was driven by something more strong and truly alluring, the urge to have a leisure time and to do a leisurely task. And each such task was performed by the mind and body in perfect harmony, leading to a greater degree of satisfaction. This is an argument that tries to narrate a mind's functioning, that a mind, if not preoccupied or forced with an everyday task, functions in a more elegant way, and thus establishes that the body comes closer to creating a thing of beauty that lasts more efficiently in its isolation with a happy mind, and is capable of communicating with the viewers with a higher degree of ease through a thought or a vision or a very simple dream, which, in its mysterious ways, allures the heart of the audience generations after generations. A generation is defined by its capacity to make available choices. Today, the choices are numerous, and this numerousness tells a more intriguing fact about how we think and process information. It also defines the multiple dimensions of our imagination. And the world today has defined 1,000 different leisure dimensions which painters like Salvador Dali and Picasso very aptly represented in the canvases, abstracting a series of their dreams. And abstraction is just a human narrative. It simply is not a miracle. It's just a phenomenon that the mind has gone through repeatedly, and it's always not a beauty.
The dilemma of being in two different realms of defining beauty is yet another very important thing associated with every thinking mind. Dual character of beauty, as defined by Immanuel Kant, free beauty and dependent beauty, govern all form of objects. Free beauty is beauty devoid any preconceived notion or influence. And on the other hand, dependent beauty is tainted by a preconceived notion and thus a presupposed end. For instance, the following mudra has a specific meaning and may be beautiful due to a preconceived idea of the language of Bharatanatyam among people familiar to this dance style. While on the other hand, any other person would enjoy the freedom of multiple interpretations and won't be biased by the idea of this language. Which beauty to indulge in is the dilemma of an artist while creating the art. This dilemma persists, but not in every act of creation or thought. Free beauty is dream. The audience relates to the mind and the art of the creator with a remarkable ease. Laughs if it is funny. Recognizes the landscape, wonders at the mystery. Such a work, the audience declares, is a work by heart or by soul and not by the body. And the simpler and truer the hearts, the better they relate and more soulful the work becomes, thus endures. Dependent beauty on the other end is automatic. It is rooted on curiosity, imagination and on exposition to information, a manipulative creator and a period. Relation is diverse in case of meaning and can sometimes hide the actual meaning and the value of the object. So Kitu, now that you look a bit satisfied, I will invite my friend Gaurav to take the discussion further.
Thank you, Abhishek. Having argued thus far, it seems as though there is only a couple of statements to make. The mechanics of the mind is bent towards the simplicity of the things. The basic urge of the mind is to process the simpler thing first. Be skeptical about the complexities and, if comprehensible, justify it by its originality. For instance, if I have to solve a very complex equation, I'll first try to simplify its contents for myself either by striking off the irrelevant elements or by dividing it into parts. Likewise, if a generic observer was presented with a photograph in front of him, he will at once understand the denoted meaning, which is actually the literal meaning of it, and subsequently he might try to understand the connoted meaning behind it. An artist, for instance a movie maker, tries to manipulate the reaction of his audiences to what he wants. He uses the techniques such as surrealism, intellectual montage, deliberate control on the speed of frames, etc. But at the same time, he gives some space for the audiences to ponder upon and make it simpler for them to comprehend. As seen in this example from a movie Strike by Sergei Eisenstein, where he used a combination of scenes evoking similar feelings. As soon as one engages and relates to the movie, one begins understanding the whole plot. The curiosity disappears and the message gets connected in his mind. So Kitu, what your mind actually does it makes a very simplified image of available information and tries to relate it to all prior comprehended knowledge it had stored in the database in form of images. Then by comparison, it gives a new meaning to it until it satisfies itself. But does the mind only relate to complex beauty only as long as it ignores to comprehend it? Does the mind start bending for the meaning in the efforts of the comprehend what an author of the art meant to communicate, and in the process bend so much that it gets disconnected with its beauty? No, it does not. The mechanics of the mind can be manipulated for achieving a certain degree of appreciation, so that we adhere ourselves to the creation of free art, and this can be done by strengthening phenomenology as a basis of the art creation. Well, having said this, there might be a lot of relevant contrast in the physical practice of the articulation of a thing. There come the inevitable existence of two polar ends of the manipulation, phenomenological and rational. As an example, filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, who mastered the act of movie editing, used small shots, combined them together to convey an abstract message, hence successfully creating a desire, force and reaction. Eisenstein developed a genre of filmmaking which deals in extensive manipulation of thoughts of the observer. All of these genres are collectively termed as avant-garde cinema, which developed by challenging the curiosity quotient of the viewers.
Thank you, Gaurav. Last but not the least, the introduction of the term curiosity becomes indispensable for understanding our minds better. Curiosity has a very intricate relationship between comprehension and imagination, to the extent that one might convince himself that each one has a dual character of being both the fuel and the retardant at the same time for the other two. Vague as it may feel to you guys now, it may be well understood by narrating an event that happened to my friend a while ago. He was told by someone about the existence of a red door outside his room. With an inquisitive mind, he wanted to find out about it. After checking the door, he got impressed and wanted to know what was on the other side. Having no clue what was inside, he opened the door and was surprised by all the blood spilled over. Got scared, but thought what could have happened there? Murder? Who could be the victim? But since he had to board a flight, he reluctantly left, thus leaving his questions unanswered. Since he was lacking time and didn't want to put in an extra effort, and of course was a little scared, he did not progress towards answering his curiosity. What we can interpret from the story is that all the reasons for his hesitancy not only kept him from advancing towards the goal, but also in the process killed the intensity of his curiosity in finding the next step, because of which his search finally lacked his soul. Analyzing further on these lines, from our day-to-day examples, we discovered that these are not the only reasons which mess up curiosity, and thereby the involvement of soul in whatever we do. But also there are more depressing factors which include, but are not limited to, time, resources, lack of a catalyst, permanent degree of imagination, a perfect environment, and the most evil of them all, our comfort zones. All these drag us down, overpower our desire to be curious, and act as hurdles in the way of attaining an absolute comprehension. For answering your question, Kitu, I will need help from my friend Kushal.
Okay everyone, I apologize on behalf of all my teammates for making you go through all this theoretical torture. Unfortunately, I'll just help you to raise the level of your torture. Nevertheless, I'll just bring it all in the realm of an art form to which most of us present here are familiar with, architecture. But before proceeding further, let's just conclude what needs to be kept in the back of our mind for easy and quick comprehension of the upcoming text and visuals. I just need you to remember the following lines. With comprehension comes the end of imagination. With a balance between mind and soul comes absolute comprehension. With absolute comprehension comes the accomplishment of nirvana. Through our discussion above, we saw how curiosity drives our imagination and how imagination leads us. Okay, wait, hold on. I'll answer you, Ketu. But before that, let me ask you a basic question. What is the space? In the meantime, all our intellects here, please don't find any obligation to keep yourself from helping out Ketu.
Yeah, Ketu, what is the space? Okay, wait, let's help you out. Space may be defined as a demarcation by a set of definite planes, but it's difficult to externalize or quantify the effectiveness of a space. The effectiveness of a space rests in or is derived from any primordial feelings that might generate in a user at a given time. These feelings hold true despite all cultural contexts and most upbringings.
Hey look, I don't think this is helping. Okay. When was the last time, Ketu, that you were in a hallway, stairwell or an alley that you felt moved from within? Why is it that certain spaces appeal to you in an instant? Why is that certain spaces arouse your interest and feed your imagination, whereas certain spaces seem to stifle your very own daydreams?
Space as a phenomenon has existed alike in past discourses, which looked at this phenomenon directly appealing to one's consciousness. This theoretical position is from the Greek word theoria, which means looking at. We establish here that phenomenology in architecture is a look at architecture through the consciousness experiencing it. Here the space is analyzed through the architectural feeling in contrast to a system-based analysis of the formal structure, proportions and stylistic references. There is a definite relationship with the perceiver that is sought, and thereby the element of active engagement is further reinforced here.
An architect is well equipped with tools and wisdom to design spaces rationally to satisfy a given brief. Seen here is the Bauhaus School of Design, where architect Walter Gropius followed a distinctive modern style, connected the different blocks with functional spaces, and even used glass towards the correct orientation. Sufficient spaces were allocated for walkable corridors, and an efficient staircase also existed, which is serving its purpose. But the job is not over with just that. As architects, we need to think how those spaces will engage the users, which is exhibited here in the family logic set up by architect John Gordon in northern France at Guy. He was restricted by the space constraint along with the pressure of fitting in maximum number of people. Still, he managed to create spaces with which people could relate to by making them flexible, not just functionally, but also phenomenologically. There is a central courtyard which is used by kids for cycling as well as by adults for protest, community meetings and exhibitions. The long corridor-like balconies overlooking the courtyard were gradually adopted as socially vibrant spaces by its inhabitants. The necessity of calmness and privacy was well understood by architect John Nouvel when he was asked to design this social housing project called Nemesis in France. He used this existing boulevard as separator as well as a shaded interacting buffer between the two blocks with long corridors overlooking the green belt. Even Richard Rogers emphasized on this huge frontage which he designated for public to interact with his phenomenal facade at the Pompidou Center. Talking about office spaces, it should just not be a mere orthogonal arrangement of workstations to squeeze in some people efficiency and make them work for 8 to 10 hours. Instead, even the specification of finishes and incorporation of natural light, as done by Frank Lloyd Wright at Johnson Watt Administrative Building, created an ambience conducive for working. It was well supported by the pleasantly landscaped spaces, both outdoor and indoor. Well thought elements of design, like the mushroom columns and the impressive dome in the triple height space in this case, makes the user feel special and they enjoy admiring these. The fresh and smooth interiors of this building were so emotive that made critics describe it as a woman swimming naked in a river. Even in a very functional space like this indoor swimming pool, architect Peter Zumthor managed to create a soothing ambience by application of an ideal choice of a local stone called gneiss for huge clean interior walls and the perfect artificial lighting added on to the tranquil mood.
Music degenerates if it's moved too far away from dance, and poetry shrivels if it becomes too remote from music and song. Similarly, architecture has its own origins. The architectural effect is supposed to be the definite manifestation a space has in an individual. Architecture loses its effectiveness and remains to be just a building when it's moved too far away from these origins.
So Kitu, I hope now you realize that as an architect, how immense your sphere of influence is, since you belong to a group who is directly involved in the creation of this ideological space. We, as architects, just need to realize our potential to create that ideal ambience where we can allow ourselves to be engaged one-to-one with the user through our architecture, through the spaces we create, and possibly tackle one or more of the factors that may bring forth an early end to our otherwise inevitable curiosity. We have with us the power to manipulate elements that govern the spatial quality or effectiveness of a space. Of course, we are bound by the functional requirements of a building, but there are categories like residences, temples, cultural centers, educational institutes, etc., which gives us more freedom compared to buildings like hospitals and hotels. There are examples of buildings like the Lotus Temple that create meditating ambience with natural light and air, while temples like Akshardham could have been more than just an exceedingly ornamental landmark. Talking about residences, we observe how materials can add psychological texture, like a Thomas residence, and it's not restricted to designing rooms of specified sizes, as observed in the GDA plans. Elements of design like the louvers at the Habitat Center or the courtyards around the trees at Alliance Francaise create that microclimate which compels people to enjoy those spaces a bit longer. People visit various museums to appreciate the building more than its content. So why are Indian museums subjected to display requisite antiques, while so much can be said just by the form as done at Bilbao and Jewish Museum? Creativity needs to be exploited to the maximum while a student evolves his own thinking. So creating two tidal corners with perfect volumetric like these at the Millowners building and IIM Ahmedabad favors unrestricted imagination. Last but not the least, simple design intervention like these at German Square, where the architect encourages public interaction by installing landscape travel boards, gives the space a completely different meaning.
What Shiva is trying to say here is that every spatial composition must contain a meaning, which must rise above the visual stimulus that is perceived through a balanced play of volumes. One must recognize this meaning as a basic vocabulary which delineates architecture from scenography or large-scale installations. Architecture is basically to be understood as the junction of truth and art. We know that we do not live in this world forever. We, being mortals, are born to a purpose, and we all will die. Some achieve this higher purpose in life, and some die early, with the purpose never realized.
Why do we still continue to build? We merely try to give our momentary existence to this world a sense of eternity, and that the dwelling unit is in fact just a metaphysical entity we use to arrive.
We need to create an environment which removes at least one of the evil obstructions in our path to absolute comprehension. Sensory engagement is inevitable to cater to the need of the extremely dynamic and heterogeneous contemporary world, which craves to be looked through a phenomenological lens rather than a semiotic one.
In this process of growth, in this process of encouraging intellectual giants, in this process of discouraging emotional dwarfs, we tend to neglect these phenomenological aspects and act as robotic intermediates between the given facts and figures and the materialization of the same. Where are we heading?
Thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to request Dr. Krishnakant Sukla to open the floor for everyone present here for further discussions on the topic.